have a rainbow of yarn in your cupboard if you wanted to, and I just want to knit with it. So I do. Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. I'm here with Knitting Natter to help you learn to knit the easy way. We are talking storing yarn again, but this time, this week, in week 2 of the yarn declutter, we are talking how to organise that yarn. If you're at different stages of your knitting, you may want to organise it differently. And over the years and through the phases of your knitting experience, you may want to change the way that you organise your yarn. So let's start at the very beginning, shall we? That's a very good place to start. As a beginner knitter, you are likely to be experimenting with one yarn at a time. So allow that to enter your collection. Once you've knitted it, you'll know whether that type of yarn suits you yet or whether it's just too much already. It's perfectly okay to say goodbye to a particular yarn and then let it in again when it feels that it might be easier to knit with. So storing them in weights can really help with knowing which needles you need. If you store the different weights with the different size needles that you need for that yarn, then you won't have to do quite so much exploration as you find the yarn, then you have to go and find the needles. So if it's all together and stored together, then you will definitely find your knitting an easier yes. You'll know what you've got, it's there ready and waiting for you. And introduce new ones one at a time. This is where the yarn declutter will really help you as beginners. Just get to know your yarns a bit better. Take your time going through any stash that you do have. And if people have given you yarn because they know that you're starting to knit, then you can actually really get to know that as well. Explore some of the videos on here that are relative to yarn and learn a little bit more. There's also a couple of courses over in the Academy that will help you learn more about yarn as well. I will link them below. So what I love to call the next step knitters. You've had enough of knit and purl. You've got used to picking up your drop stitches if something goes wrong. Perhaps you've gone through a couple of the beginner courses in the Academy. That will give you a good grounding, a good foundation in beginner knitting. Then new yarns will start entering your knitting life and you can start storing them slightly more creatively. So you may want to store your yarns by fibres. That's just a slightly bit different to beginners, where I would concentrate on weights as an important point. As a next step knitter, you can start sorting more by fibres and brands than necessarily by the weights, because you will know when you see a yarn that's what you're looking for. You would feel a lot more intuitive if you've knitted with it a few times before and possibly knitted with it for years as well. You may also start to find favourites. If you do start to find favourites, then make them a priority in your stash. Share them where you'll see them a lot so they inspire you to knit. Have all the colours that you really like sat there waiting for you to knit with. Yes, you don't want to be over-inspired and have so many things you want to knit that you never actually knit anything. It can be really helpful to just say, actually, they're my favourites. I love having them in my stash so I can just pick them out anytime. For example, I will pick up a favourite yarn, and while I've had COVID, I've been knitting baby beanies. And it's such a wonderful knit for me. I recognise the pattern because I made it so many years ago and I've knitted it so many times. And it's a favourite yarn too. So I love knitting with it. It's really good quality and it just makes me happy. I know it's there, I love picking it out when I can, and I just want to knit with it. So I do. Declutter perhaps more regularly as a next step knitter. You are just experimenting a bit, you're finding new yarns. Obviously we've got the knitting notebooks over in the shop if you want them to just keep track of what you're knitting with, which patterns you're using it with, when it does and doesn't work. Then those notes will say, actually I'll come back in 6 months' time and I'll highlight that page in the notebook. And if you keep referring back to that notebook, you don't have to keep all of the yarn in your stash. Some of those choices that you start making about what you do like, what you don't like, what yarn works for you and what doesn't, will actually help decluttering become easier. So you can actually make choices with a lot more discernment. Okay, let's move on to experienced knitters. Experienced knitters makes me think of my grandma. She would knit, have a conversation and read a paper at the same time. Miss Marple. If you've ever watched Miss Marple, Joan Hickson knitting in the 1980s with the BBC Miss Marple adaptations, when she was actually playing the part of Miss Marple, she was remembering the lines, she was acting, embracing the role of Miss Marple, but not only that, she was knitting without looking at her knitting. That was my dream experience when I was a child. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to knit with my eyes closed. That's an experienced knitter, but that is a very advanced experienced knitter. I'm not suggesting knitters need to go quite that far to become experienced. Experienced is maybe understanding a few different styles and techniques such as cabling or colour knitting or sock knitting in the round, that kind of thing. It's just those experiences that give you that confidence. That's the biggest thing you need to remember as an experienced knitter. Do you have that confidence to see your stitches, know what they are? Make a mistake, know how to fix it. Diagnose mistakes, and indeed then be quite happy and quite calm about fixing them as well. That is really important as an experienced knitter. So what about the yarn? You can get really creative with your organisation. You can mix it all up, move the colours around, do the fibres. You could basically have a rainbow of yarn in your cupboard if you wanted to, but all the fibres are mixed up. All of the different types of yarns are mixed up. Do what you like with it. But yes, do make sure you know what you've got. If you're going to do the complete mix-up, all over the place kind of yarn organisation, keep a note. Have a notebook with all of your different yarns set out so you know what you've got. You could definitely sort by fibres as well, and you could even sort by size or shape of ball. I've done that in the past too. It's actually been really helpful because some of the donut yarns don't quite sit very comfortably with the longer yarns. So the balls don't quite suit each other. So if you have different brands and different fibres of yarns stashed and they're all mixed up, then just be aware of that too. Also take a look at the ball bands, and if it says dye might run, for example, some of the denim yarn that I've got behind me, that is recycled denim. It's just like wearing a new pair of jeans. It says basically on the label, don't wear on a white sofa, dye might transfer. It's something to be aware of, but don't worry too much. The other thing about experienced knitters is that as long as you've got that notebook, you know where it is and you're diving into it as well regularly, then you could keep it in different parts of the house. The beginners and the next step knitters, I would say definitely keep it all in one place. But if you're an experienced knitter, you know what's where, then it could become more of an artwork, a display, a talking point. So you could have your knitting, maybe you've got lots of yarn skeins from independent dyers. They could be all hanging on a pegboard somewhere, and it could be something that people say, oh yeah, I remember you knitting with that, I got that pair of socks. And you've got all of the different dyes and you grab a skein regularly. And it's there and it's open to light and it's not going to get dusty because you're moving it around. Another set of your yarn, you might just decide to put all the wool away this time of year in the spring, and then you'll swap it for the cotton that you've got out and ready to use when it comes to autumn. So it can be a lot more creative as an experienced knitter because you've got so much more awareness and understanding of yarn. So yes, definitely, over the beginners, the next steps, and the experienced knitters, make different choices, choose different options, but the biggest thing is don't keep too much. You don't need that much yarn. This is why we're doing the yarn declutter. Keep what you love knitting with, keep what's useful to you, keep the fibres that you like as well. And of course, you have to remember to knit with it. It's not just there to stash. It's very tempting to just go out and get new yarn when you find an extraordinary pattern. You can do that occasionally, but one of my biggest tips would be you could set yourself a challenge. Now you're doing the declutter. If you discover that you've got far too much, then say, okay, for every 3 projects that I knit this year, 2 of them will be with stash yarn and 1 of them I'm allowed to get new yarn. And any leftovers will find space within the stash. At any stage of knitting, what might really help you is going through your works in progress as well. There is a whole section about works in progress, not only in the yarn declutter but also intuitive knitting, and that's in the academy. So the yarn declutter free yarn declutter that we're doing at the moment. Please do sign up for that, knitwithhannah.co.uk/declutter. Anyone can join that. Just dive in and I will let you know more about how we're getting on as the weeks go by. But also the yarn declutter in the academy just goes a little bit further, so there is a works in progress section right in there. I do hope I will see you next week. We're going to talk next week about why you have too much yarn. It just kind of happens, doesn't it? But why is that? I will share the 2 biggest reasons that we have far too much yarn sometimes. I will see you again soon. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye for now. Happy knitting.